Hello, students of United States history 1865 to the present. We're talking today about the Great Depression, and I'm coming to you today next to my bicycle that I've had for a little over a year now, my new bicycle. And there's a reason for that. We'll get to that in a minute. I am not at all interested in getting into the debate with you about the causes of the Great Depression. Many people have different theories. No one's quite sure about it. We can say that it was not because of the stock market crash of October 1929, though that may have been a contributing factor, but much too easy to blame it on that. At any rate, what I do want to try to explain to you is something that I think is fairly simple, but we rarely think about. So what caused the Great Depression? No one can pin it on one thing. However, it is very important that you and everyone understand how the basics of how the economy works. And more importantly, your role in the economy, somewhat connected to the government's role in the economy. Okay, so here's something that happens when economic depressions, recessions, economic downturns, depending upon whatever word you want to use or how bad it is. Okay, so let's say we have someone who works in a hardware store, and that hardware store does a lot of business with the people in town who work in a mill. In fact, the mill itself buys the products the mill buys from the hardware store, makes up 10% of their business. Another 30% comes from the people who work in the mill. The mill closes, right? The mill made shoes with big heels. And you know what? People just didn't want shoes with big heels anymore. So the mill closes. Well, that affects the hardware store, right? The hardware store then, they don't want to close, but they just lost 40% of their business because the people who no longer work in the mill don't have enough money to buy stuff at the hardware store, and the mill itself is, okay. So then the hardware store has to lay off 3 people who work there. So then we've got those people laid off, along with the mill workers. Those people and the mill workers are not going to the local bar. Well, they go to the bar for a couple of weeks to try to drink away their troubles, but after that, they don't go to the bar, restaurant in town anymore. So guess what? That place closes. Those people, along with the people who worked in the hardware store, those 3 people and the people in the mill, they are no longer going to, they're just going to stick with the shoes they have. Now we're back to shoes. So they're not going to go to the local shoe store anymore. So the local shoe store, now I'm keeping this local, but you can see how there's a ripple effect, right? The mill closes, the hardware store lays people off, the restaurant goes out of business, the shoe store goes out of business. Now we've kept this local as a basic example. However, think of where that ripples out to, right? So the hardware store is now not ordering as many nails from the nail factory in Pennsylvania, and the bar isn't ordering as much beer from the brewery 3 counties over 100 miles away, so they each have to lay people off. And the truck driver who brought the nails to the hardware store, along with other things, well, the truck's not as full anymore, so the truck driver doesn't have to work as much, so doesn't make as much money, and then the truck, right? So once the economy starts to unravel like that, right? It's like pulling one thread in a sweater, and the whole thing starts to fall apart. Now, let's back up a little bit. Before that, I used the example of the shoe factory, and there was a change in fashion, so the shoe factory stopped. What happens more often is the economy gets what we call overheated, right? People want those shoes from the shoe factory because they're really popular now. So the shoe factory borrows money to put an addition on. Okay, well that's good. They borrow money from the bank. And people love those shoes so much, they're going to get the shoes on credit, maybe a credit card, right? So now the shoe factory has borrowed money from the bank, and the people with the credit card, they now owe money, but they've got the shoes, and this is all very exciting, right? Construction workers are building the new addition onto the mill, so the hardware store is doing better. So everything is ramping up, right? Because more people want the shoes. The shoe factory is getting bigger. The construction workers go to the bar after building the addition every day, working every day at the shoe. So everything goes. But you can do too much of that, right? Because at some point people are going to stop buying the shoes, and everybody's got the shoes, right? Anybody have Crocs, right? Crocs, I don't have Crocs, but I guess they're pretty much indestructible. Bad business model, right? Everybody who got Crocs wanted them, and then they last forever, so it was a problem. Anyway, I digress, but you're used to that. Okay, so everything's great, right? Until all the people in America decide, well, we've had enough. I can't afford any more shoes. So they stop buying shoes, and then the shoe factory is like, this isn't good. We have to lay off some workers because people bought too many shoes, and we really shouldn't have borrowed the money. But the bank let us have a lot of money because the bank had a lot of money because everybody had a job. But now the shoe factory is closing half of its place, right? Half the factory is gone. The people here who owe money because they borrowed it to buy shoes and other things, some of them actually worked at the shoe factory, so then they can't make their payments to the credit card company. So the credit card company then has to say to the bank, well, we don't have enough money, and that's a problem, right? When the banks fail, that's a problem. So that's why the government has mechanisms in place so banks don't fail. So you can see, hopefully, the two things I've taught you already, and then we'll get to my bicycle. Number one, you can see how interconnected the economy is. And when one thing starts to go down, the shoe factory, hurts the hardware store, and then those people don't shop at the bar, and that the bar doesn't buy the beer, and the person who drives the beer truck doesn't have work, and the whole thing starts to unravel. That's important to understand, okay? That's important to understand how interconnected everything is economically now in a developed country like the United States. And as it was in the 1920s. Of course, it was much newer in the 1920s for everything to be so connected. And then in the 1930s, the Depression hits. We have such a sophisticated economy, factories in Ohio making things for people in Texas, etc., that when one thing starts to fall apart, it affects the entire country. So you see that. The second thing I was just trying to teach you is how economies get overheated, right? People start to spend too much. People spend money they don't have, but they feel good because, hey, the economy's good, and that's what the news is telling them. And people start to make bad business decisions because they want to make a lot of money right away. Let me build onto my shoe factory so I can make a lot of money, but I'm not ready for when people don't want my shoes anymore. So the shoe factory owner made a lot of money for a couple of years, and then maybe, took his money and his wife, and went out of the shoe business, and the workers all got screwed. That's probably what happened. So here's a more tangible example. So about a year ago, COVID started, right? And immediately people started to lose their jobs. We're going to talk more about this in class. People started to lose their jobs. Restaurants were forced to close so people didn't get COVID and die. So it created immediate unemployment. And to prevent the whole economy from falling apart, the government was like, have money. People take this money and spend it. We'll talk more about that in class this week. So one thing I decided to spend my money on was something I've wanted for many, many years, a new bicycle, and a bicycle specifically designed to ride on gravel or dirt roads, which we still have some wonderful dirt roads around here. And it works pretty well on paved roads also. So I started shopping around and Cost a little more than I expected, but of course I had just gotten a stimulus check from the government. I wasn't driving my car to Columbia Green anymore, so I wasn't using much gas. My insurance company is sending me checks because people aren't crashing into each other anymore, etc. So here's what happened, and I, just stimulated the economy. I ordered a titanium bicycle frame built in Tennessee, built in the state of Tennessee. So workers in Tennessee had more things to do. They had a bike frame to weld, and they had to take these titanium pieces and put it all together. So that helps the bike factory in Tennessee that I ordered a titanium bicycle frame. UPS had to bring me the titanium bicycle frame. I don't know how to put a bike together, right? All the parts and things. So I had my friend Jim, who has a business of putting bikes together. My friend Jim ordered these components, right? The pedal and the crank and the derailleur. He ordered those from the Shimano company. Shimano makes its stuff in Japan. So these specific ones were probably already here, but the Shimano factory in Japan had to make more since I'm creating demand here in Kinderhook, New York. Someone has to bring these over here in a giant ship, and that ship probably came to Los Angeles, and a port worker in Los Angeles had to take them off the ship. A truck driver or train brought them somewhere to a warehouse where someone blah, blah, blah. So you see I'm stimulating the economy from Japan all the way here to Kinderhook, from Tennessee to Kinderhook, right? Stuff's happening. My friend Jim, who assembled it all for me, he charged me a certain amount of money to do that. He's my friend, but it's his business, so I didn't expect him to do it for free. Jim really likes Mexican food, so Jim goes out to Albany and his favorite Mexican restaurant and gets a nice big Mexican takeout meal for him and his wife with the money I paid him to put the bike together. So you can see, right? Don't just think of yourself. Don't just think of yourself. We tend to do that because, well, we're concerned with ourselves first. Don't just think of yourself when you spend money. If you want to understand how the economy works, how money works, how products work, you have to think of the ripple effect into places you can't even imagine. Remember a few weeks ago I showed you pictures of the clothing factory fire in Bangladesh that killed, I think, over 1,000 people? They were making clothes for us, right? They were making clothes for us here in America. Our demand for those cheap clothes at places like H&M, H&L, HM, whatever the name of that place is, creates demand, the factory, etc. So it's all connected. And until you understand that connectedness, you don't understand how one piece of it falling creates other pieces falling, a ripple or domino effect. And then, because of that, you have to understand how stimulus money, which we'll talk about more in class, the government just saying, here's some money, keeps people buying stuff, keeps people from, so I bought this, so I created some employment, right? I created some employment. And just, I'm a little embarrassed how much this stuff costs, but it's a lot. Let's put it that way. A bicycle like this with these nice wheels, everything combined cost about $4,000. $4,000. This bike will last me the rest of my life. I'm 51. I hope to be 80 years old riding this bike. My last bike, which I still use, I bought in 2001. So they do last a very long time. Admittedly, that is a lot of money for a bike. Though if you know a lot about bikes, you're thinking, I know people who spent more than that. Anyway, so I use my bike here as an example of something I decided to do because I wanted a new bike. I had a little extra money from government stimulus a year ago. So I spent it. I didn't have $4,000 from the government stimulus, but I spent it and I felt like I was doing my part. Also, I didn't have much to do last summer except try to build my classes, but my other activities were curtailed because of COVID, so I wanted the bike to ride around. So there's your quick economic lesson about how things are interconnected.